Aloha and welcome to the Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month. This year's theme is Invasive Species Are Everyone's Kuleana, emphasizing that protecting our islands is a shared responsibility that we all can take part of, including Aloha Aina for these islands where we live. Tonight, we will explore how community science tools and technologies like iNaturalist, eBird, and 643pest.org empower each of us to contribute to this shared responsibility. By observing, recording, and reporting what we see around us, we have an opportunity to play an active role in engaging with our surroundings, learning about the plants, animals, insects, and all of the other non-human inhabitants that we share these islands with. You may even get a chance to discover a new invasive species and stop the next super invader. So tonight there will be 4 experts in these technologies that will share how you can use these tools and how these tools have transformed the way they do their invasive species work. So our first presenter will be Kevin Facenda. He is a graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, studying invasive species with a focus on grasses and early detection. He is a strong supporter of citizen science such as iNaturalist and volunteers often identifying plants on the site with over 100,000 identifications made for others and 30,000 photos submitted. He is definitely an iNaturalist super user. Then we'll be joined by Molly Murphy, who is the Invasive Plant Prevention Coordinator for BIISC. She regularly uses iNaturalist to detect newly naturalized species on Hawaii Island. With the power of iNaturalist, what used to be a slow and expensive process of searching out these new invasive pests has become much more efficient and effective. Leveraging the collective knowledge of iNaturalist users, BIISC can stay ahead of the curve when it comes to identifying and managing incipient or new invasive species on Hawaii Island. Then Lance Tanino, who is owner-operator of Hawaii Bird Guide, LLC, as a naturalist and birding guide, will talk to us about eBird and his use of that. He's also a contracted biologist for Cyanotech Corp, and he's been an eBird user since 2005 and served as an eBird reviewer for the Hawaiian Islands and U.S. minor outlying islands for over 5 years. Lance has been the inaugural voting member for the Western Field Ornithologist Hawaii Bird Records Committee since 2014. And he is Hawaii's eBird super user. And then finally, I, Elizabeth Speith, will talk to you a little bit about 643pest.org and how to take pictures to get identified. So my name is Elizabeth. I'm a coordinator for the online pest hotline, 643pest.org, and one of the support staff for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. The council is a collaboration of 5 state departments: the Department of Ag, DLNR, Department of Transportation, Department of Health, and the Department of Business and Economic Development and Tourism, and UH. And they all provide policy level direction, coordination, and planning on invasive species projects across the state. So just a reminder to add your questions to the Q&A, and I'll hand it over to Kevin Facenda. Mahalo.
Good afternoon, everyone. So for my presentation, I was asked to kind of give my perspectives on iNaturalist. So this is the takeaways from 4 years of using iNaturalist in Hawaii. Before I start off, I kind of want to introduce what iNaturalist is. It's a website and app where you can submit photos of wild organisms, be it plants, bugs, birds, bacteria, anything. And there's a machine learning model which will try to identify that organism for you and put a name on it. And then from that, it goes to a public database where volunteers will go through and identify those and confirm the identifications or suggest new identifications. And the general thesis of my talk is that it's a really great learning tool for learning about the biology in certain areas, or just learning about biology anywhere. It's like social media for plants. Okay, next slide, please. So my background, I moved to Hawaii in 2020 when I got accepted to grad school at UH. and I really didn't know much about what occurred in the islands. So kind of iNaturalist was kind of my introduction to the flora of Hawaii. And on the right is the first iNaturalist observation I posted when I was here in July 2020 when I was during a 14-day quarantine. I uploaded a brown banded cockroach I found in my house to iNaturalist. Uh, and then before I moved here, I had used iNaturalist a little bit on the mainland during the COVID lockdowns there, so I could kind of get some experience with, or pretend I was outside, I guess, even though I was stuck at my computer. So next slide. So I started off using iNaturalist, just logging plants on hikes. So I would walk around Makiki Loop or walking around urban Honolulu, taking photos of plants, and I would upload them when I got home on the website. Uh, so this started getting me introduced to the flora using the computer vision of iNaturalist to identify these plants. But then a whole bunch it didn't really work for. iNaturalist has come a long way in 4 years. Uh, but I also bought a whole bunch of books, like the Flat Manual of Flowering Plants and the Fern book, and those were really useful for confirming what came out of iNaturalist. On it. The next slide. So as I continued uploading plant photos, it wasn't too long before I found some species which were identified as on iNaturalist, which weren't found in the manual of flowering plants. Uh, so this book was published in 1990, and as Molly will talk about, there's been a lot of plants introduced to Hawaii since 1990. Uh, so there aren't really any other resources for plant identification in Hawaii besides for Facebook groups and social media like iNaturalist. So it was really useful for learning these. I would post a photo of some plant, identify it at a not quite right level, whether it was incorrect or at the genus level. And then sometimes somebody would come along who's an expert in that group, maybe from Texas or from Taiwan or wherever, and identify the plant with the correct ID, and then I could double check the ID and learn a new plant. And sometimes that was really useful for learning about uh, these new introductions that aren't in these older books. And go to the next slide. So, as I mentioned before, iNaturalist has a mode where you can identify things which were posted by other users. So once I started getting a bit more comfortable, once I had posted a bunch of plants, I started to learn some of the more common species. I started going through this backlog and adding identifications to all of there are something like 30,000 plants for Hawaii when I started, and I would chip away at it, doing 100 a day or something like that. Although I did skip a whole bunch of them, which were poor photos or identifiable. But I started going through that and putting names on these plants, and that also taught me a lot because I could I could see new plants that I'd never seen before through these photos, and so I was able to learn about these species I just never seen before. And sometimes I didn't actually identify the plant, but I could still learn it even if I didn't know what it was going into it. I could pick it up through identifying. And it also helped other people learn what plants were growing around them too, which I thought was really great. So next slide, please. So later on, a couple years into using iNaturalist, I started using it for my UH research. Uh, Part of this research was going around between the islands and doing grass surveys. So I ended up generating a whole bunch of photos of plants growing around the islands. And I figured iNaturalist would be the best way to kind of store that data. I would make it both public which I really liked. And it would also allow people to peer review uh, all of my observations of these plants around the landscape and kind of double check me if I got anything wrong. And there were plenty of times I did. Uh, so I ended up doing roadside surveys on all of the main islands, or most of the main islands for grasses. And I posted, I don't even know how many of my observations came from those surveys, at least 10,000 uh, came from those surveys. And I put all of them up on my naturalist. And it was really useful for organizing all of the data, and it filled in a lot of gaps on the maps, my naturalist, which I also thought was really useful. Uh, yeah. So then more research uses for iNaturalist. Since I'm quite into grasses, uh, I've gone through all of the grasses which are posted from Hawaii and on iNaturalist and confirmed the identifications or fixed identifications for these grasses. So they're quite accurate there, in addition to the ones that I've posted myself. But what I was able to do is use that data for another one of my research projects. So I downloaded all of those observations because the iNaturalist data has GPS points. So I filtered out some of the ones which had large uncertainties or were put in the middle of islands and things like that. And I've used that to make an atlas of all of the grasses in Hawaii, where a lot of this data that goes into the maps that you're seeing on this screen came from iNaturalist, from tourists on hikes, or from locals logging a weed in their yard, or anything like that. And it's been really useful to get that data uh, in some of these places where there haven't been any sort of botanical surveys, but people have used citizen science, like iNaturalist, and posted these plants from like the Kohala Mountains, places that are kind of inaccessible, but they've still gotten some points posted up there. So it's been really great to be able to use that data for research and for making these maps. Yeah, you can go on to the next slide. Another thing from iNaturalist is some unexpected misidentifications. So there are some plants where in the manual it treats them it uses a certain name for these species. So I had identified these plants as the name in the manual according to that list. But then some other users who came along from other regions of the world realized that name was not quite right. It was an incorrect name. It was misidentified in these official resources. And here are two photos of these species, one of which was a kind of widespread thing where a lot of people had been calling it species A in the 1990s when the manual was written. But since then, it's been realized that that's not actually uh, correct to call it this thing in all of these different places. So somebody let me know that I had no idea that this species was actually misapplied, and so I was able to correct that on iNaturalist, and also officially I have a paper submitted to the Bishop Museum correcting that officially and noting that the manual was wrong. And that's just thanks to an iNaturalist user. And the same thing for the species on the right. This is a sedge that was found at about 2,000 feet in Kahuku on Big Island. And then I had posted a few of them, so it put me on kind of the top observers for the species. Uh, and so somebody had tagged me on one, and it was growing at a coastal site in Tonga, I think. And so at that point, I realized that their ID was actually correct. It's a coastal species. And in Hawaii, we had been using the wrong name. So I was also able to get that fixed thanks to uh, some users on iNaturalist pointing out what these species look like in different areas of the world, which is great. We can go to the next slide. And the kind of final thing, which will transition into what Molly's going to talk about, is new records. So people had posted plants on iNaturalist, which had never been seen on Oahu before. So I've kind of made it a side project to track down some of these species and formally document them, making museum specimens and kind of assessing the population size and so on. And Molly's kind of taking that even a step further on Big Island, and let's hear her talk about it. That's all for my slides.
Thank you, Kevin. And I just want to tell everybody, Kevin is being way too humble for what he has done for documenting and finding newly naturalized plants throughout the whole state. Many of the ones that he just talked about were misidentified. He used the word misapplied. People were just thinking it was one species and they were incorrect. And Kevin has found the correct ID for so many grasses and so many species. And we are very lucky to have him here in Hawaii. Okay, so now I'm going to start. So why do we care about invasive species? Did you know that you can import, grow, cultivate, and sell more than 99% of the world's flowering plants to Hawaii? No questions asked. There are laws listed for noxious weeds. That's about 100 plants, and that gives the Hawaii Department of Agriculture the authority to regulate the trade and growth of these plants. However, this list hasn't been updated since 1992. So it's not keeping up with the times and trends of the plant trade. Plus, in theory, you can import a noxious weed with the correct permit, but as long as you have the permit and you're doing the right thing, that's okay. But accounting for area, Hawaii is in the top 3 hotspots for established alien species, and they are still arriving every day. So this is the invasion curve. I'm sure many of you have seen it, but as time goes on, the more costly and difficult it is to manage invasive species. At BIISC, we work on all phases of this invasion curve. So right here we have prevention, and that is our Plant Pono program, which is a voluntary program where we hope to inspire the hearts and minds of residents to do the right thing by just not planting, not importing invasive species. We have no authority when it comes to regulating, the trade and sale of invasive species. So then we come to the eradication stage, and that's if we find a plant that's escaped cultivation and it's in a small enough area where we're a grant funded organization where we have the resources to eradicate that plant. So that's always going to be a small list of plants. And then we have containment plants, which is usually us helping with other agencies to keep invasive plants out of high value native forests. And then we have the point of no return. And that would be for something like little fire ants, which I don't think will ever eradicate off of Hawaii Island. But we work teaching residents how to manage them in the most cost efficient way. So we are forced to be reactive, not proactive. So we are trying to learn to be reactive as quickly and efficiently as possible. So the way we used to do it, early detection. So early detection means finding a plant that's escaped cultivation, that's growing on its own and spreading, creating new seeds on its own without human help. So the way we used to do it was driving all the roads on the Big Island at 5 miles an hour. And it took us 5 years to do the whole island. And during that time, we averaged 8 naturalization records a year. doing this kind of survey, you have to be hyper vigilant, and you can't see in people's backyards. One time we were doing this and we got to the end of a dead end road, and we happened to turn into someone's driveway to turn around. And we pulled up just far enough to see a pampas grass population. At the time, pampas grass was an eradication target for us at BIISC. Had we not driven up that far, we would have never seen it. Thankfully, we worked with the owner of the home, and we eradicated that pampas grass population from their home. And as far as we know, from Hawaii Island, every population we know of has been controlled on Hawaii Island. So it does take a lot of time and energy to do this type of survey. There is one plus, you can document a large list of plants while you're driving. But of course, it's costly. This process took 2 to 4 full-time people 5 years to drive the roads. And as I'm sure everybody knows, funding is thin when it comes to invasive species. So we need to do better with what resources we have available. So here's the new way, using citizen science plant ID apps for early detection. Since implementing this method, which Kevin Facenda has shown us the way, and we're very thankful for all of his help, we're averaging 18 naturalization records a year. So that means, like I said, a plant's escaped cultivation, reproducing on its own. We go out, we ground truth it, we document the plant, we press it, we send it to the Bishop Museum, Herbarium, and they confirm our submission and, you know, let us know, yes, it's naturalized. So this is a really efficient way to go about this process. Of course, there's a caveat. It depends on people uploading pictures with accurate locations, and new species need to be identified by humans. So Chromalena odorata, otherwise known as devil's weed, is probably beyond eradication on Oahu. It was uploaded to iNaturalist on Hawaii Island 2 years before we physically found it. And it was Kevin Facenda who went through the backlog of unidentified plants and let us know, hey, we found this. But we had already found it like physically, but he let us know other locations. Had we been implementing this method, we could have been 2 years ahead of the game. That's 2 years of not controlling this noxious weed. So we're thankful to be using this new way of doing early detection. Plus, it enables us to see in people's backyards and places we can't see from the roadside or the car. So these pictures that I'm showing is Rosa rugosa, who it hasn't been documented anywhere in the state. It's an invasive rose species. Kevin emailed me and said, hey, Molly, there's this new plant that I'm seeing here on Hawaii Island. We didn't know the species, we just knew the genus. So we went out and looked at it. It was Rosa rugosa. It hasn't been documented anywhere in the state. So Rosa rugosa, here it is compared to Hawaii Island and the continent. So this orange spot right here represents the one location on Hawaii Island. And all of these represents where it's spreading on the continent. So without even doing any research, you guys can all see that this is an invasive plant and it's spreading, and we should control it. So we are working, you know, with our colleagues to figure out, and our grant funders, do we have the time and energy and resources to control this plant? Which we're working it out. I'm pretty sure we do. So it also works for early detection in another way. This is without humans looking at new plant submissions on iNaturalist. So on the left, we have the Hawaii vascular plants checklist. So this is a list of plants that have been confirmed to be naturalized throughout the whole state, and it's separated by county. So that's on the left. And then in the middle, we have all of the plant points ever submitted to iNaturalist. So by we, I mean Kevin, we put them together and filtered it and then gave us an output of plants that could be naturalized on Hawaii Island, but haven't been documented yet. So these are all plants that would be an island record. They've been documented on other islands or counties throughout the state. And so in theory, we could just drive right up to these plants and ground truth it to see if it is indeed naturalizing or not. Because there are false positives with iNaturalist. So it's not just for early detection. It also helps with our containment and management species. Here we have Myconia on Hawaii Island. And if you can see all these red icons, these are all Myconia locations on iNaturalist. This is also within our containment zone. So if we find Myconia growing up in like Hawaii, all forces will be on the ground. We're going to go out and we're going to get it right away, because this is an area where Myconia can grow, but it can't make it over there due to landscape barriers. It just can't make it over there naturally. So this green icon represents Myconia creeping out of its containment area to the highest location that we have seen yet. It's almost at 3,000 feet. So thankfully we found this and we were able to go up and we pulled out the juveniles before they started fruiting and making seeds. I mean, these plants make 3 to 9 million seeds a year. It could have infested Hakalau, the Hilo forest reserves. So this was like a really good way to do early detection on a containment species. So you might be wondering why we keep talking about iNaturalist. Well, Kevin Facenda, me, and Chuck Chimera did a study last summer looking at the 5 most popular plant ID apps. And we took 250 expertly ID'd photographs and uploaded them into each one of these apps. And we recorded their identification. Well, it might not come as a surprise. iNaturalist was the best. And it's not just the best. We recommend it highly because it has a best computer vision algorithm. The data are made public for citizen science, which helps us track the spread of invasives, helps us map native plants. The computer vision updates monthly. And it's not just for plants. You can do bugs, birds, fish, etc. Also, it's free and there are no ads. You would have no idea how much time I spent on the clock at work doing this study, uploading it into some of these apps that have ads. And I would have to wait 2 minutes to get a simple plant identification output. It just took too long. And more importantly, the identifications are confirmed by real humans like Kevin, who is a superstar iNaturalist user. Maybe I think it's one species and somebody else thinks it's another. You can talk to each other and work it out and understand why you're wrong or you're right. And it really helps everybody learn the plants better. So we wholeheartedly recommend the website version of iNaturalist. Okay, thank you. That's it for us.
Mahalo, Kevin and Molly. That is just so fascinating to hear about what a powerful tool iNaturalist is and how you guys are using it to improve the ways that you look for incipient plant species on Hawaii Island. We're going to shift gears now and move away from the plant world and talk a little bit about eBird. And so, Lance, if you want to turn on your video. Mahalo. Okay, Lance, take it away and let us know a little bit about eBird.
Mahalo, Elizabeth. Thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about eBird. So eBird is sort of like iNaturalist, except it's totally focused on birds. It started as a website. It started in the early 2000s. It's an open source resource. It's run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology up in Ithaca, New York. It's not only used by bird watchers and birders, but it is used by educators and scientists as well. There are over 100 million bird sightings reported on eBird annually all around the world. And each year it has a participation growth rate of 20%. So come along and join us, fellow birders, whether you're not a birder yet or not. It's a great and fun way to keep track of the birds. It's as simple as just noticing and recognizing the birds in your own backyard, especially in the Hawaiian Islands. I mean, it's really good to keep track of what kind of birds we have in our different parts of the islands. With introduced birds, it's very fun to see their distribution change over the years. Especially things like lovebirds on the Big Island. They have been spreading pretty fast across from Waikoloa Village across into Kailua Kona pretty fast over the last couple of years. Thanks for changing the slide. So there's a website version that you can submit observations, but there's also a eBird mobile app that you can put on your phone. And then once you do the eBird mobile app, next slide, you can download it onto your phone. And it's as simple as pressing that big green button there that says start checklist. So one of the great things about eBird is that it wants simple information like when you saw it, where you saw it, how you saw it. And you can also attach photos and sound recordings. And I'll talk a little bit more about Merlin, which is the app that you can record sounds. And it also helps you identify birds from photos and sound recordings. So with this kind of simple information of when, where, how, it helps document the bird observations with their distribution, their abundance, their habitat use, and trends in their populations. So as you can see in this slide here, it uses your GPS on your phone, so it can track your movements. It'll measure the distance you hiked while you were looking for birds. And then it also gives you a checklist that gives you the list of birds that is most likely in your area. And you can download the Hawaiian Islands pack to get a more focused bird checklist for your area here in the islands. And then you can also see your movement by looking at the photo or looking at the GPS tracking your movements. And you can use that to help measure the distance that you traveled. Next slide. Some of the key features of eBird, the checklists are customized for your particular location and the time of year, and the most likely real-time feedback, especially of sightings that are rare in the area. And it's a really quick and easy app to use. And I mentioned that the GPS helps, is very important in letting everyone know where exactly or the area that you saw the birds. And they have an explore function where you can really go through the data and you can really look at the data all throughout the island or by each county. It does divide it into not only the country, the state, but also by county. Next slide, please. Here's another. So the eBird hotspots, there are certain eBird hotspots. For example, on Oahu would be maybe Kapiolani Park, where there's just lots of bird diversity at the park, or a place like on the Big Island at Kaloko Honokahau, Aimakapau Pond is a very popular place to see birds of various species. So these are locations known for their high abundance of birds and high diversity of birds. So they make these places called hotspots, and you can just see over the years, or just by the year or by the month, the abundance of birds, what kind of species people are seeing every time. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like on your phone when you start to do your checklist. It does have the time, the current time, the date, the track record, and also again the start checklist. Next slide. So the Cornell lab also has another app called Merlin. It's you can use it just like you do with eBird, except it's a little more simpler. If you just want to keep track of the birds you saw and not keep track of date, time, location, distance, and all that, you can actually keep a life list just by using the Merlin app and just to say that you saw it. But you need to download the US or the Hawaiian Islands has its own pack that you can download to focus just in the Hawaiian Islands. Next slide, please. And so this is a slide giving you examples of some of the birds that for places in the islands with all the HISC committees, the Big Island HISC committee or Maui, you may want to keep track of some of these escaped cage birds that have become established in the islands. For example, on Oahu, on the left, the red-whiskered bulbul and red-vented bulbul have really spread across the islands. But here on the Big Island, the white cockatoo has a flock up at Hualalai that is a good species to keep track of, as well as the rosy-faced lovebird would have been spreading in the islands, as well as the burrowing parakeets. Next slide. Here's an example of rose-winged parakeet. This is the more recent sightings that have been made on Maui. Up until just very recently, rose-winged parakeets have not been known to occur on Maui. They've been very common on Oahu and Kauai, so much so that they've been considered pests by agriculture, etc. But here on Maui, here's some early sightings of rose-winged parakeets. So this is something to keep an eye on, and this is something that maybe agriculture or someone may want to keep track of or maybe deal with in the near future. Because in the next slide, I'll show you what can happen if we kind of ignore what happened. Oh, here's red-vented bulbuls. There's also another recent sightings that have been made on Maui. And this is considered a noxious pest by the Department of Agriculture. So this is something that people can keep an eye out for and submit their sightings. And with these sightings, there is quality control. So there are reviewers in each county that help do quality control with these sightings. Next slide. So here's an example of what can happen when you do not or make a mistake of ignoring some of these eBird sightings. The white-rumped shama was first detected by birders and submitted eBird checklists way up in Honolulu Bay near Kapalua, not less than 10 years ago, maybe about 5 years ago. And then nothing was done about preventing the spread of the white-rumped shama. And just in a very, very short time, I think 5 years or less, they have now spread all across West Maui. And I thought that they had just started Haiku, Paia area, but now there's sightings all the way down into confirmed sightings all the way down, all the way across to Hanai in the Kipahulu Valley. So this is an extraordinary quick expanse of this species that I thought they were moving pretty fast in West Maui, but I had no idea they had literally gone all the way across Haleakala. So I think in the near future, the Big Island, especially in North Kona, is something to keep an eye out for. So this is something that could be prevented if we look at the eBird data a little more closely. Next slide. So this is what the Merlin app looks like on your phone. It's a very easy, just press the sound ID and then it'll start recording. Next slide. And it also can help you identify the birds by taking a photo of the bird, and it'll help you identify it also. Next slide. And this is what's cool about it. It will, right now at the current moment, in Hawaii, it does recognize birds that are found in North America, but it does not recognize any of the native Hawaiian birds yet. It'll probably happen in the near future. They need at least 100 quality recordings for the artificial intelligence, the AI, to learn and recognize the sounds of the native birds. So they're working on it, and I'm sure it'll happen in the near future. So it's really cool to see the spectrogram. You can see the individual signatures of each species of what their spectrogram looks like when they vocalize. Next slide. So mahalo, thank you very much. And I welcome any questions or help with identifications anytime. You can check out the Hawaii Bird Watching page on Facebook, and you can share your sightings also. But I hope that this will get people interested in using eBird. If people use, if you know of people that play Pokemon Go, this is a perfect way to get into the real Pokemon Go through birding and using eBird. We're chasing actual real bird creatures, and it's great citizen science, and it's great fun. Thank you so much.
Well, mahalo, Lance. That is super interesting, and I know I have fun with eBird, going out and Pokemoning, looking for all of the different birds I can identify in my neighborhood, and when I go holo holo or up on the mauna. So I am going to take a few of our remaining minutes to talk a little bit about how, so we've talked about these really incredibly powerful tools. And I want to tell you a little bit about how you can maximize your potential IDs by taking pictures and short videos so that you are improving your chances of getting all of these new organisms you're going to find identified. So as I mentioned, I am the coordinator of one of the online pest hotlines, 643pest.org. There's also, so this is a statewide thing. And our hotlines are complementary to a lot of these community science tools, in that we have these ways that you can make a phone call to call your local Department of Agriculture inspectors. That is 7 days a week during business hours, or 24/7. You can go online, report what you're finding, take a picture, and some of my colleagues will help figure out what you have, what you're reporting. And if there are any people out there like Molly with BIISC that can take action if it is actually an invasive threat to our islands. So just to show you, to give you an idea and to lead into what I'm getting ready to talk about, we've had a whole lot of reports at the online pest reporting, nearly 6,700 reports, and that covers 432 unique species. And during that time, and working with specialists and taxonomists, we've learned a thing or two about what works and what doesn't work when somebody submits an image of something that they want to tell us about. So I'm going to go over just some of the very brief ways that to be able to increase your ability to get all of these organisms identified. So most of what we're looking for when we're identifying plants, insects, birds, every one of these different organisms have a special thing we're looking at. Now, you are not expected to know that right off the bat. So I'm going to just give you some kind of overview tips that might help improve your chances of getting all of these organisms identified. So with plants, you want to take multiple pictures. This series of pictures will most likely increase your chances of capturing the unique identifying feature of the plant you're trying to get identified or share with someone. Focus on the flowers and fruits, because those are often really great ways to identify plants. And with flowers, you want to take a picture straight on looking at the flower and at the side of the flower, because sometimes that's where the identifying feature of those plants are. you want to take a picture of the whole form as well as the leaves. And just a tip, I'm going to follow up at the end of this with some specific iNaturalist tips. For these, you want to take a series of photos. When you're using iNaturalist, the very first photo you upload is going to be the one that the computer vision uses to identify. So in that case, you want to, if there's flowers and fruits, send that in. But in general, for all of us humans, take several photos. You're more likely to capture the identifying feature that we need to figure out what it is you spotted. So because Kevin's joining us today, I had to point out sedges and grasses are even different. Now, you are not expected to know all of these unique things that you will find on sedges and grasses, but if can, take a picture of the flowers, which would be like the spikes in this leaf sheath if you run into a sedge, or the grass head seed. And with grasses, this clasping part where the leaf clasps around the stem, that actually is where a lot of the identifying features are. So think about that if you want to get some of your backyard grasses identified. But do not just submit. If you see something, you're like, what is that on the side of the road? Don't just pull over on the side of the road and take a landscape picture. It is incredibly difficult to ID from a distance when it's grouped in with everything else. And almost all of these photos are from things that have been submitted to 643pest.org. So you can tell, like, what is it that we're looking at here or over here? So moving on to insects. Every type of insect has another unique, it's just like plants. There's all kinds of unique things to look out for them. So some key things that you can do is take a picture of the top, like looking down at this koa beetle. You would look down, straight down, and take a picture. Bottom if you can, and the sides, because sometimes the sides, like for this caterpillar, will have stuff like the prolegs, which is key in identifying them. Take pictures of the different eggs, larvae, and adults. Every one of these pictures you take helps provide another clue. And cover all of those angles, but the most important is from the top. Include something for scale. So it's really great when you can have a coin, something like a ruler in your picture. If you use a banana, please specify what banana you're using. Banana for scale often works, but we have lots of different bananas. So you might have to clarify a bit there. And remember to stay safe, because some insects that you'd be grabbing up, they have the potential to sting or hurt you. So do be careful while you're doing it. Use a plastic bag if you have to. So another kind of clue with insects is looking at what those insects are eating or damage that they do to plants. So right here you see the frass and tree sap that's coming from a Queensland longhorn beetle damaged tree. That is a really great clue to learn about an insect that might be inside of the tree. The same thing with coconut rhinoceros beetle boreholes. And for some insects, like many butterfly or moth caterpillars, they have specific host plants. So telling us what plant you found that larva on might be the clue that helps us figure out exactly what you spotted. Another don't, if you can avoid it, taking little blurry pictures of ants doesn't work that great. Same thing with plants. You may not capture exactly what that IDing feature that really helps us ID it. You can try making a do-it-yourself macro lens with a common jeweler's or botanical loupe and your phone that can help zoom in on some of these maybe not as fast-moving creatures to zoom in on some of their identifying characteristics. And because at 643pest.org, we have had well over 1,000 coconut rhinoceros beetle reports in the last year. I do have to throw this one in. If you think that you have encountered a coconut rhinoceros beetle, much like a butterfly or moth, they have a life cycle in which they have many different forms. So take a picture of the beetle. But if you find the larva, there's some other ones that look like this same huge, crazy looking larva. So take a picture from the top and bottom, and even a short video of it crawling I got this one from last week on Maui, and let play for just a moment. So these larvae will either crawl on their back or their side. So you can see, look at that. Sorry, there was someone commenting on it, but they don't even use their legs. They just crawl on their back. That helps us identify it. And a little note, if you are finding coconut rhinoceros beetle outside of Oahu where it is widely infested, please report it to 643pest.org or your local invasive species committee so that we can do something about it. Otherwise, you can post to iNaturalist so that we can track its spread. So a couple more do's and don'ts. With a lot of insects, it really helps if you can hold on to a specimen until it's identified so that we can get that shot so we can figure out what it is or the video of it crawling. For most of these, if you keep it in a hard-sided container with some of the material you found it in and keep it alive, that's best. But don't throw it away and then tell us that you saw something, because sometimes we will not be able to tell what it was just from the picture. And another do, so ants are incredibly hard to take small, they're moving. It's hard to take a picture even with that do-it-yourself macro lens. So remember, you can go to stoptheant.org, order one of these kits to help you collect ants, and you can send them in and get them identified free on your island. Sending in a picture of or sharing a picture of just the nest is not usually enough to identify them. I'm going to go a little quicker through these, but we get lots of reports for slugs and snails, and there are a lot of slugs and snails out there that we encounter. So they're another one where there's all of these specific features that you have to look for. So on snails, it really helps to get a shot of the side and its opening or aperture. And for slugs, we're using a mantle, which is where it would have a shell if it was a snail. Its foot, which is all along here, its tentacles, there's a whole bunch of stuff we're looking at. So take a couple of pictures, but please, once again, stay safe. Slugs and snails may carry rat lungworms, so don't touch them with your bare hands. This isn't in Hawaii, so they are not risking it really. Use gloves, chopsticks, or a plastic bag if you want to take pictures of these organisms. And then finally, it's not just photos. When you encounter an animal, they're often moving. It can be really difficult to capture a clear shot. Short videos will capture vocalizations of birds. With koki on islands off of Hawaii Island, they're more often heard than seen. So even if you can't see it, capture a short recording, and not only will the humans, but even the computer vision and the eBird AI might be able to identify it. Scat and tracks are also super helpful for identifying mammals. So remember, we're looking for a whole bunch of different clues to help us ID what's out there. And as I mentioned, here's some special tips just for iNaturalist. So this will increase your chances of being able to upload that photo and get it identified. The AI uses the first photo primarily in an observation. If it seems off what it's saying that you found, try a second photo instead. Double check results. The AI is, and as we know with all AI and computer vision, they're becoming incredibly accurate and really advancing fast, but it's still wrong about 1 in 10 times. So once you get an ID, cross-reference with other photos for confirmation. So more clues to figure out if it was correct. Check the range maps. So in iNaturalist, you can ask it to look more closely to help with identification. So it's comparing your photo or recording with something close by, but you really want to check the range maps to make sure that that species it identified matches those known in Hawaii and not somewhere else on the planet. Ask for clarification. So as Molly mentioned, talk with the other folks, and Kevin, talk with the other folks about what is being identified. And a lot of these guys that are on there volunteering are happy to discuss. And remember, all of these guys, even Kevin, for a lot of the work he did, they are volunteers, so be patient. And for plants on iNaturalist, it is primarily focused on wild organisms. So if you're taking pictures of the cultivated plants in your yard, do label it as a cultivated organism. So I gave you just a brief overview, but there are so many resources online about how to record these organisms to help get them identified by either humans or by some of these new technologies. I'm including one right here. You can just look it up, iNaturalist photo guide. There's a ton of them, but I found this one useful, even though it focuses on British Columbian species or BC species. But it was a pretty good guide for how to take different kinds of pictures. So mahalo, you guys. I'm going to stop sharing. So mahalo for joining us on this. And I think we have time for, oh, we did our time. Do we have time to answer questions? And mahalo all of you for sharing your expertise and your kitties, Molly. And it looks like there was some questions in the chat, but most of them have been answered.
If we could go over them for the folks on Facebook. Let's see. Let me go through. There was one question about eBird. Does eBird have features to create collections like iNaturalist? I don't know. What does that second part of the question mean? Meryl's question.
I'm not sure, but I tried to answer it in the chat.
Let's see, let me scroll down. Did not say. Oh, Meryl, did you want to unmute yourself?
You don't have to. I kind of put her on the spot. Sorry.
Oh. Let me see. Let me read what Lance said. eBird has a My eBird section where it lets you know your total species observed, complete checklists, species with photos, and species with audio by region, country, state, province, and county. That's awesome. I'm going to download eBird after this. Okay, let's see. We have one question from Chuck. It's a question for Kevin and Molly. Can an iNaturalist record be used as an official collection of a species for documenting naturalization, or is a physical voucher specimen required?
For the Bishop Museum, who is the kind of caretaker of the official flora of Hawaii, a physical specimen is required. So in order for it to get added to their checklist, they need to have the physical specimen just for reproducibility purposes. So somebody could examine that specimen and confirm the ID. And if the iNaturalist website were to go offline or something like that, there's still that specimen stored in the museum, which will be accessible for as long as the museum exists.
Thanks, Chuck, for that question. And it's like really hard what Kevin just said. The specimen will be available as long as the herbarium exists. I don't know if anyone else has heard, but like, what was it? The North Carolina State Herbarium they lost funding, and so that it's no more. So I don't know where those specimens will go. Sorry. Doesn't have much to do with the question, but.
Let's see. I think there was another question about Albizia.
There's one in the Q&A too about Albizia.
Okay, let's see. Oh, yeah, that was Clem. Are we trying to do anything about invasive trees? Albizias are a threat to power lines since they grow fast and fall over easily. Yeah, so albizia is definitely a huge problem, something that our east side communities deal with. And there are ways to report hazardous trees if they're hanging over power lines and roadways. And then for non-hazardous trees, we teach the community how to actually control those trees themselves. BIISC is a grant-funded organization. We have very limited resources and staff. So as much as we would like to control all the albizia trees on the island, it's just not possible for us, but if you send us an email, Clem, and kind of explain your situation, we can definitely help with recommendations for you. I think we have another question. This one is for Lance. Chuck wants to know, what negative impacts are the Shama thrush expected to have where they are not naturalized or currently naturalizing?
I'm not sure. That would be a good question to ask Maui invasive species. They've been kind of looking at that issue, and the Maui, the more specific, the Maui forest bird folks have been keeping an eye out on the shamas. But you know, they eat a lot of insects, so you could assume that they would get into higher elevation and eat insects that would maybe compete with other native bird species. But other than that, I guess we are finding out now if anyone wants to look closer at the Shama thrush as they spread quickly through the islands.
For Joshua's question, can iNaturalist be used to document things out of the ocean or near the shoreline? Absolutely. There's a few people who are pretty active identifying limu and snails and fish and things like that. So definitely.
Was that all the questions, Darcy?
That's all I see.
Got everything. Oh, and Clem, you can also email us about Little Fire Ant, and we can help give you recommendations as well. Doesn't look like we have any questions coming in from Facebook, so.
Okay, well, I think this might be a good time, you guys, to mahalo all of our incredible presenters for sharing how they use these tools and what powerful tools they are. And mahalo all of you for joining us. And here we go, it popped up. For those joining live on the Zoom webinar, please fill out this really quick 2 questions webinar poll. Really appreciate it about engagement. But mahalo to all of you, Facebook Live, and in the future on YouTube, speaking to you in the future. Mahalo for joining us to discuss about these powerful community science tools and the roles they play potentially in invasive species management.